No one can keep a secret forever. Bob and Mary Ellen Samuels lived on the edges of Hollywood glamour and excitement.
He was a cameraman, but he knew celebrities. I think that that was just the best thing that she could imagine.
But a dark secret would turn their sunny Southern California dreams into the ugliest kind of nightmare.
When it comes to secrets, the fear is that they will get out.
And in the end, it will cost the lives of two victims, both violently murdered.
I think people were pretty fearful of this really unpredictable person who could carry out some pretty cold-blooded things.
Soon, every dirty little secret will be revealed. It's 1980 in Los Angeles, California, and for all who harbor Hollywood dreams, Bob Samuels is one of the lucky few who's actually achieved them. The 32-year-old native Californian works in the entertainment industry, behind the scenes on dozens of Hollywood blockbusters.
He studied really hard and took photography classes and became good enough that he was a very successful assistant cameraman in some major motion pictures such as Lethal Weapon 2, The Color Purple. He was a pretty well-respected camera guy.
But for all the success Bob's had, one dream's always stayed just out of reach. And her name is Mary Ellen Gurnick.
Mary Ellen was just a very flamboyant, gregarious, outgoing lady who was kind of the life of the party type of person.
She literally was the girl next door, and he had a crush on her from about the time they were 8 years old, and they went out and went to catch pollywogs together or something.
Bob never got up the nerve to ask Mary Ellen out as a teen, and the two went their separate ways after high school. But 15 years later, both are living in California, and a lot has changed. Bob has become a very impressive package, and Mary Ellen is looking to start her life over. She's a divorced mother with a young daughter, but ready to jump back into the dating game. When Bob finds out she is single, he jumps at the chance to ask her out. Mary Ellen very happily says yes.
I think a big part of Mary Ellen's attraction to Bob, other than the history that they had together, was the fact that he was Hollywood. He knew celebrities, and he went out on locations, and that was just the best thing that she could imagine.
Maybe she'll go to parties. Maybe she'll meet movie stars. She didn't know where this would lead, and it certainly was exciting and also glamorous.
In 1980, Bob writes his own Hollywood happy ending, courting and finally marrying the girl of his dreams. He adopts Mary Ellen's daughter, Nicole, from her previous marriage, and the Samuels begin a new life in the Los Angeles suburbs. But Bob also knows that Mary Ellen loves luxury and comfort, so he does whatever it takes to please her.
He was a good provider. The movie business paid very well, and he spoiled her. He just completely spoiled her.
But after a few years, Bob and Mary Ellen's initial romantic excitement begins to fade. Bob is often out of town on film shoots and leaves a bored Mary Ellen at home for weeks at a time. Bob buys a restaurant franchise to give his wife something to do while he's away. But for Mary Ellen, food service is nowhere near the glamorous life she signed up for as the wife of a Hollywood cameraman.
Back in the 1980s, there was a saying in Los Angeles and in Southern California, life in the fast lane. And I think Mary Ellen had big stars in her eyes and wasn't all that interested in the cul-de-sac and the little ranch house in the San Fernando Valley. She wanted to glam it up.
And to get all the things she wants, Mary Ellen isn't afraid to bend or break some rules. When he's away on film sets, Bob suspects that Mary Ellen may be helping herself to extra cash from their business.
Bob had gotten suspicious that Mary Ellen was actually pocketing money from their sandwich shop and just pulling money out of the register because that's what she wants to do.
And so it kind of became party central in a way. It wasn't really run as a business, and that bothered Bob.
I don't want to spend my days cutting up tomatoes and onions.
Finally, after 6 years of marriage, Mary Ellen decides her life with Bob isn't everything she'd hoped for.
I'm sorry, I deserve a lot more.
She leaves their family home and moves into a condo with her daughter Nicole.
When Mary Ellen Samuels decided to leave Bob Samuels in 1986, she left him a Dear John letter. And basically, her letter talked about the marriage becoming stale.
Now that Mary Ellen is single and free, she has nothing to keep her from the endless party she's always wanted. Not even her underage daughter. Mary Ellen becomes the ringleader of anything that sounds like a good time. She even takes 16-year-old Nicole and her friends drinking and bar hopping late into the night.
So you can imagine as a 16-year-old girl watching this sort of glamorous woman who happens to be your mother, living a lifestyle that she probably only read about or saw in movies. It was a pretty exciting life for her.
To Nicole and her friends, Mary Ellen was the cool mom because they never got carded. If they were with Mary Ellen, everybody knew Mary Ellen. It was cool. Drinks on the house.
Here's a mother who goes out to clubs with her daughter, goes out to party with her daughter. There seems like an inappropriate relationship between a mother and her daughter. They're not best friends, but that's how they appear. And Mary Ellen is a mother, but she doesn't act like a mother. She's more acting like a friend to her daughter. It's diminished parenting skills and also encouraging inappropriate behavior for her daughter. Curious combination. And you wonder psychologically, did she never live life or did she never grow up?
Mary Ellen and Nicole are rapidly becoming part of the in crowd at many of LA's hottest clubs. And that's where Mary Ellen meets and falls for another man in the entertainment industry, Dean Groover.
To a 40-year-old woman who's trying to hold on to her youth, Dean Groover was the key to heaven. He represented the music scene, the club scene, the party people, everything that Mary Ellen dreamed of.
Dean is a music promoter and fixture in the LA club scene. And when he first meets Mary Ellen Samuels, he thinks he's met his perfect match.
Mary Ellen was carbonated, bubbles, full of energy. And plus, the way she dressed was very erotic, very sexy. She wasn't afraid to wear anything. And she could fit in just about anything and wear it well.
Mary Ellen's having the time of her life. And Bob soon realizes that she's really moved on. After a 2-year separation, he finally takes the steps to formally end their marriage. But it's not looking to be a bitter divorce. During their time apart, Bob and Mary Ellen have maintained a friendship and see each other regularly.
When Bob and Mary Ellen Samuels split up, it was amicable. They worked together at the shop. They even shared custody of the dog. He was going to give her what she wanted.
In fact, they've remained on such good terms that Mary Ellen still has a key to Bob's house. And in early December 1988, she's been trying to get in touch with him. She's left a number of messages on his answering machine, wondering where he is. After 2 days without hearing from Bob, Mary Ellen decides to go over to his house with Nicole to see if anything's wrong.
Bob!
What they find is a horrific scene beyond what anyone could have imagined.
I believe he had a towel around his waist, and his head is all bashed in and bloody.
It's December 1988 in the suburbs of Los Angeles, California. Mary Ellen and Bob Samuels have been amicably separated for over 2 years. And when Mary Ellen hasn't been able to get in touch with Bob for days, she goes to his home with her daughter Nicole to check on him.
They walk into the house and it's Bob, Bob. No Bob, no answer.
Bob.
Mary Ellen and Nicole find Bob Samuels lying on the floor, the victim of a shotgun blast to the back of the head.
They see Bob sprawled, and I believe he had a towel around his waist, and his head is all bashed in and bloody.
I just got to my house and my husband, I found him in a pool of blood. I don't know what to do. Please come quickly. Come here.
Mary Ellen
immediately.
calls 911 for help,
Mary
and
Ellen
police
Sanders.
rush to the home,
Yes.
but it's clear there's nothing they can do for Bob. As officers survey the scene, they form a theory about what may have happened.
The best that we could piece together about his final hours was that he had come home, went in to take a shower, and was walking down the hall when he was confronted. We think he was caught by surprise, almost instantaneously knocked out, and then shot.
What investigators find also explains why Mary Ellen hasn't been able to get in touch with Bob for days.
Investigators will look at any number of things, any number of clues to determine when someone may have been killed. Yes, there are the forensic clues, whether the blood is congealed, whether the body has a certain temperature. The police quickly determine that he hasn't just been killed in the last few hours, last few minutes. He's actually was killed 48 hours.
On the surface, it seems unimaginable that someone would want Bob Samuels dead. He's a hard-working father and husband, and well-liked in his profession. Detectives wonder if Bob's murder could be the result of a robbery that went violently wrong.
As they looked around, they noticed that some teacups were knocked off a shelf, drawers were left open. It looked like somebody had rummaged through the place.
Although the house is in disarray, police find no signs of forced entry. There are no broken locks or smashed windows. And a closer examination of the scene reveals an even more telling detail. Nothing valuable seems to be missing.
Bob Samuel's wallet was still in the house. There were checkbooks there. I believe that there were some uncashed checks that were on the desk. There really was nothing else to suggest that this was a botched robbery or botched burglary.
Once it's determined that Bob wasn't a victim of a robbery, a much more disturbing explanation starts to take shape. Someone wanted Bob Samuels dead very badly. In fact, it looks as if he was executed. What in Bob's life could have caused this kind of violent end?
Once the initial theory starts to fall apart that it was a break-in, police look into the background of the victim. Did he have any enemies? Was he involved in any kind of shady deals? Drugs? Was he a drinker? Was he going broke? Did he have a business partner?
Mary Ellen's boyfriend, Dean Groover, soon develops a theory that Bob may have been keeping a secret that led to his murder. He thinks Bob had a small side business selling film stock to people on the margins of the film industry.
During that time period when Bob was in the film industry, and he did quite a few major films, he was saving the ends. And these ends he was storing in his garage in a hidden place.
Short ends are sections of unused film negative that are left on a reel. Movie film is expensive, and these valuable leftover pieces can still be used for other film productions. Dean believes Bob may have been taking the ends from his movie shoots and reselling them to porn producers.
And that was a theory that I had, so they could make their films, and he was making a good sizable income on the side. I found a receipt stuffed in a very secretive place in his office that had an inventory of all this film that was there and dated. So it should have still been there because it was dated right there at the time of his death.
No one can confirm anything about a side business, But Bob's execution suggests he may have been involved with the wrong kind of people.
I'm sure the investigators had to be thinking from the very get-go that this was possibly a contract killing or a hit, as it's commonly referred. And they're going to point their investigation at that point into who has a beef, who has a vendetta with Bob that they would want to kill him.
In the end, police don't find enough evidence to support Dean's theory, but they do want to take a closer look at Bob's wife, Mary Ellen Samuels. In cases of domestic homicide, detectives know that the most intimate relationships also can turn violent, and a spouse is always considered.
People like to think that in murders that there are random killings all the time. In actuality, there are not. Murder, 80% of them are usually associated with a person that is close to the victim. And police investigations start with who's the husband, who's the wife, who's the boyfriend, who's the girlfriend.
But Mary Ellen has a solid, clear alibi. She and her daughter Nicole have been together all week. And time-stamped voice messages confirm she has been calling Bob for the past 2 days.
Bob, it's Mary Ellen. I'd really like you to get back to me as soon as possible. Are you around? I've been trying to reach you for a couple of days, so please call me when you get this, okay? Bye.
They had no reason to suspect her. After all, her voice was all over his answering machine. She'd been trying to reach him all weekend.
Although Mary Ellen is ruled out as a suspect, she gives police a solid lead. She thinks she knows someone who could have wanted Bob dead. Mary Ellen tells them Bob had been involved with the estranged wife of a former cop named James Nolan. And James Nolan is a man who has a temper and loves his guns.
James Nolan was a reserve cop in Costa Mesa, and he was let go because he got violent during a domestic dispute and fired off some weapons, which is a no-no in police world.
According to Mary Ellen, Bob's affair with Nolan's wife was becoming a volatile situation.
Mary Ellen told me that he was sneaking around with a cop's wife. She told me it was that love triangle that he had with this policeman's wife. That's why she said that's why he was dead.
From a detective's point of view, when somebody gives you a guy with a hair-trigger temper, an arsenal, and a relationship that's going south fast, who's known to be jealous, that's a viable lead. You've got to run that out.
Police have their first solid lead in the brutal murder of Bob Samuels, but there are other secrets in Bob's life.
Yeah, I don't know what to do, man.
If those secrets are at risk of being exposed, what is the result? It can really only be two things. It can either be blackmail or murder.
After the violent execution of Hollywood cameraman Bob Samuels, police have struggled to make sense of the brutal crime. Mary Ellen Samuels has explained to detectives that Bob was having an affair with the estranged wife of an ex-cop named James Nolan, a man known to have a violent temper.
Mary Ellen told the police that she thought that Bob was in a love triangle with the guy's wife, and that there was no love lost between Bob Samuels and James Nolan.
But when police question James Nolan, they become convinced he couldn't be the killer. Nolan can prove he was nowhere near Bob Samuels at the time of the murder, and there is no DNA, fingerprints, or other physical evidence that can connect him to the scene of the crime.
The investigators had to look at it, which they did, and then quickly dismissed it because there was no evidence at all to support any of those allegations.
The investigation has run down several dead ends, and police are no closer to finding out who killed Bob Samuels. But even the tragic and unsolved death of her husband hasn't changed who Mary Ellen is deep down.
I don't know, it's been nice.
I know, it's been really great.
Yeah.
We're just gonna live. Don't you want to just live?
Mary Ellen likes the good life, and she's still at the center of the party with her new love, Dean Groover.
We would walk into the club and we would look around and there'd be 500 people in the room and we'd say, buy a drink for everybody. We didn't feel we had to worry about who was paying the bill.
In a strange way, Bob's death has given Mary Ellen what he could never provide when he was alive, the means to lead a glamorous life. After the murder, Mary Ellen collects nearly $500,000 from Bob's estate.
She point blank said that her husband had been murdered, that she got a pretty good amount of money.
But Mary Ellen isn't the only one experiencing the good life.
How old are you?
Technically, I'm like 16.
Oh,
but
technically.
Her 16-year-old daughter, Nicole, has recently become engaged to a man named Jim
I
Burnstein.
didn't say a word, you know?
Jim was in his mid-20s, new on the Hollywood scene, and always bragging about how he was going to make it big someday soon.
Jim Burnstein was the typical Jersey boy. Had a big mouth, told a lot of stories. Always got up in people's faces.
Kind of acted tough, but was really not. He was a storyteller and, you know, can kind of get a sense that everything he's saying it isn't exactly true.
You want to be an actress? So.
I don't know. I mean, my
Could
mom.
be a model.
Jim meets Nicole and Mary Ellen at a bar in the months before Bob Samuels was murdered. He is working at an electronics store when he first lays eyes on Nicole Samuels. He's instantly smitten.
Nicole was 16, 17 at this time, and she was absolutely adorable. She was incredibly sweet, and he was head over heels.
He was completely infatuated by Nicole. And in addition to that, Mary Ellen seemed to approve of the courtship, seemed to approve of the match.
Jim's very much in love, but he knows Nicole wants all the things that money can buy. So he starts spending whatever it takes to keep Nicole happy.
Nicole was her mother's daughter. She viewed guys as people that were put on the planet to take care of you, to please you, to, you know, just worship and adore you. And that's exactly what Jim did with Nicole. He bought her expensive jewelry. He treated her like a goddess.
But making regular payments on Nicole's love costs more than selling TVs pays. So Jim finds a way to make a lot of cash very quickly. And it means stepping into dangerous company.
Jim had met someone or found an opportunity to start dealing in cocaine. So he started being a middleman where he would know where to pick it up and he knew somebody who wanted to buy it. And would just kind of move it from one place to another.
Once he's flush with money, Jim proposes and gets engaged to Nicole. And nearly 6 months after Bob Samuels was shot and murdered in his home, Mary Ellen, Nicole, and Jim are enjoying the party that never ends. And every lead that detectives have chased down has led to nothing. But out of the blue, police receive an anonymous phone call.
The investigators are at an impasse. They have no clues. They can't figure out who might have done such a horrific thing to Bob, who would want to have Bob killed. And they get a break in the form of a very bizarre phone call. And they say one word, Jim Burnstein.
A mystery caller says Jim Burnstein is somehow involved in the death of Bob Samuels. Is it true, or will it lead police down just another blind alley?
The way that he was speaking over the phone was so cryptic that I couldn't really put one or the other together with the characters in the story.
After After 6 months of dead ends, an anonymous phone call has now pointed investigators towards one suspect in the death of cameraman Bob Samuels. It's Jim Burnstein, the fiancé of Bob's daughter, Nicole.
Jim Burnstein certainly was known during the investigation of Bob Samuels. He was known to be an associate of Mary Ellen and Nicole.
Jim had become a big part of Nicole's life in the months before Bob's murder. But was there something else that linked the two men? And could he be behind the murder? Police bring Burnstein in for questioning, hoping the pressure of the interrogation will yield clues as to who killed Bob Samuels.
What can you tell me about the death of Bob Samuels?
Nothing, man. There's nothing I can tell you. I met him a couple of times, that's it.
What about Mary Ellen?
What about her?
She certainly came into a lot of money after Bob died, about $500,000.
Yeah? What are you talking about, man? She's a really nice lady. Mary Ellen is a really nice lady.
After the interrogation, police are convinced Jim Burnstein isn't telling them something. Investigators get a search warrant for his home, but come up empty. And with no hard evidence, they can't arrest him. But being the focus of the investigation has unsettled Burnstein more than the police know.
Matt, this woman...
He calls his old boss, Matt Rowie. Burnstein says he's got a secret and that he's afraid police are getting closer to the truth.
Man, I can't talk about it. I can't. But I'm thinking about going to the cops and just you know, giving myself up, just telling them what I did.
He said, you know, the cops are getting close with their questioning. I'm just going to go tell them what I know. If I got to go do some time over it, so be it. You know, it's off my chest. You know, it's out of my life.
This lady...
Jim never tells his friend exactly what he's done, but does say he committed a terrible crime for money.
Making me really nervous.
He said that he was getting nervous. You know, he wasn't getting any of the money. Apparently the woman had already gotten the money. The way that he was speaking over the phone was so cryptic that I couldn't really put one or the other together with it, or together with the characters in the story.
Yeah, I mean, I'm here for you as much as I can be.
Whatever Jim Burnstein is involved in, money and a woman were somehow playing a role. And it clearly has him scared.
I'm worried for my safety here, man. There's this lady who was harassing me. She's making me really nervous.
Jim says he'll be in touch soon, but after they hang up, Matt never hears from Jim again.
When Bernstein didn't call me back, you know, I really didn't know what to think. He could have been in a different situation. You know, he could have left town.
Police are moving in on Jim Burnstein as a suspect in the murder of Bob Samuels, but they think it's unlikely Jim could have acted alone. Meanwhile, Mary Ellen Samuels' behavior begins to raise eyebrows, if not suspicions. She acts as if the murder of Bob Samuels is a closed chapter in her life. She's spending the $500,000 she collected at record speed and enjoying her new wealth non-stop.
We spent a lot of money. A lot of money. A lot more than I would have spent.
Mary Ellen goes off with her boyfriend to Cancun, and she has this picture taken of herself in which she has $20,000 in cash draped around her body. This sort of is very symbolic of what this woman is all about. She's about greed and about her needs.
Although there has never been anything specific linking Mary Ellen to the scene of the murder, detectives become convinced the Mary widow is hiding something. And more, they suspect it's the murder of her husband, but they don't know how.
Although I think the detectives were pretty well convinced that she had something to do with it. Being convinced and being suspicious is not the same thing as having evidence, so there wasn't enough evidence to go and arrest her.
Police search for something to connect Jim Burnstein and Mary Ellen Samuels to the crime, they now suspect both were involved in, but the pieces just won't fit together. The investigation into Bob Samuels is stalled. But then, on June 27, 1989, a seemingly unrelated event changes everything in the Samuels case. The shocking discovery of a dead body is made in the hills outside Ventura, California, nearly 70 miles away from Los Angeles. It's been hidden in a secluded ditch off the side of the road and is terribly decomposed.
It was apparent that it had been there for 3-4 weeks. What you smelled, a dead human, you know what a dead human smells like. It's, it's a very difficult thing to walk up on if you're not used to it.
Despite the condition of the body, police are able to recover fingerprints from the unidentified corpse. The lab analysis comes back with a match and a name attached to a police record. It's Jim Burnstein.
The record was for impersonating a police officer and writing bad checks, but it was enough to give us some contact information.
But the Ventura sheriffs aren't aware the LA police have been looking at Jim Burnstein as a suspect in the death of Bob Samuels. The only information they have to go on is Jim Burnstein's arrest record. It provides his former employer, Matt Rowie, as a contact. So that's where they begin their investigation.
I told the conversations that we had, what he had said about going to the cops and telling them what he knew. I told him about the drugs or the people he was involved with.
Matt also gives them the address of Jim's apartment in LA. And when the sheriffs arrive to search Jim's home, they discover they aren't the only ones investigating Burnstein.
And in our search of the apartment, we located his address book and also a copy of the search warrant, which had been done by the Los Angeles Police Department.
The Ventura Sheriff's Department gets in touch with the LAPD, and they explain Jim Burnstein is a suspect in the murder of Bob Samuels.
LAPD believes that there's some connection between Jim Burnstein and Mary Ellen and Bob's death, and yet they can't put the evidence together.
The LAPD's interrogation of Burnstein had made them even more suspicious, but his death has thwarted their investigation. And just to make matters more confusing for police, there were other, very volatile people that Jim Burnstein was also deeply involved with.
He was not a very smart human being. You don't threaten people you're supplying cocaine to, that if they don't give you money, that you're gonna tell the cops you're giving them drugs. It just doesn't make sense. With the waves he was making, with the people he was pushing around and the noises he was making, it was imminent that something bad was gonna happen to him.
Did Jim Burnstein die because of his drug dealing? Or was his death connected to the murder of Bob Samuels? And how does any of this involve Mary Ellen? Police are at a loss for answers until someone finally collapses under the weight of a secret that's gotten far too big to hold on to.
As they put the pressure on her, she cracks. She says, I know something about Jim Burnstein and Bob Samuels.
LAPD detectives and the Ventura County Sheriff's Department have teamed up in the murder investigations of Jim Burnstein and Bob Samuels. A search of Jim Burnstein's apartment has uncovered his address book, and police begin questioning each of his contacts. It's soon clear there's a connection between Jim Burnstein and Bob Samuels. Police already know Jim had hinted to his former boss that he was involved in a terrible crime.
I did something. I did something really messed up, dude.
And that some woman had already gotten the money.
There's this lady who's harassing me. She's making me really nervous.
But he wasn't that cryptic with his many other friends. It's astounding. As police go through his address book, nearly everyone in it seems to know Jim's secret. He was talking about Mary Ellen Samuels. She had actually paid him to kill her husband, Bob.
They knew that Jim Burnstein was most likely connected to the homicide of Bob Samuels, and that he was paid to do so by Mary Ellen.
No one ever went to the police. It's a curious thing that happens in many ways. If a large group of individuals know something bad is happening, they are more likely to pass the buck and assume that someone else is going to go to the police.
Still, learning Jim's secret only got investigators so far. They need more to make their case against Mary Ellen.
But there was no proof of what they knew. This was all conjecture on their part from what they'd heard.
And investigators know a conviction can't be made on rumors and gossip. But the interviews with Bernstein's friends do give detectives a solid lead to move on. Nearly every person also mentions Jim was last living with a woman named Anne Hambley. And Anne not only knew Jim Burnstein, but she also has a very close connection to Mary Ellen Samuels.
Mary Ellen and Anne Hambley were best friends. They shopped together, they partied together, they bar hopped together.
They set their sights on her because, at a minimum, she has information about his habits, whether he said something to her.
Tell you what you need to know.
Detectives go to Anne Hambley's home and question her about her relationship with Jim Burnstein. She says Jim had been staying with her because he feared rival drug dealers were coming after him. But according to Anne, he had recently moved out.
She said that they got into an argument one night, and over a television program, he just got up and stormed out of the house and never came back.
But many details of Anne's story just don't add up.
Her answers were totally evasive, and she wouldn't answer a question straight out. You know, she danced around everything, and a man doesn't get up and walk out of a house forever and leave his personal stuff behind, especially one where he's staying temporarily.
But still, the last place Jim was known to be before his death was with Anne. They know she's the link between all three people: Burnstein, Bob Samuels, and Mary Ellen. Investigators tell Anne that Jim's friends have all told them Mary Ellen paid him to kill Bob.
I want you to tell me everything Mary Ellen did. Start at the beginning.
You don't know what Mary Ellen's capable of. She could be
Pretty much told her we knew that she was connected to or involved in the homicides, both of them. And it would be best for her to start talking about it.
Investigators put the pressure on Anne Hambley, and she's feeling the heat. She cracks. She tells them she knows about Jim Burnstein and Bob Samuels.
Promise me immunity. I can't go to jail, I just can't.
Anne agrees to tell police everything, and the murders of Bob Samuels and Jim Burnstein are finally broken wide open. Anne recounts a shocking, calculated murder plot that destroys many lives.
Anne Hambley ends up giving up her friends. She lays out the case for police. Every player, every scheme, every motive, everything.
The conspiracy starts nearly a year before Bob Samuels turns up dead. Mary Ellen was determined to live a life of wealth and privilege and had been searching for someone to kill her husband. Incredibly, she didn't keep her plot to kill Bob a secret.
She was so committed to murdering her husband that she would openly solicit people in bars and nightclubs and ask them, "Hey, I want to kill my husband, can you help me?"
And when Jim Burnstein walked into Mary Ellen's life, she found just the man for the job. Jim was easy to influence. He lacked self-confidence. He wanted people to believe he was cool. And he was in love with her daughter, Nicole.
Mary Ellen Samuel is the master manipulator, the person who is so adept at finding vulnerable, sort of forlorn personalities.
She certainly focused in on people that she felt she could control, either through praise or through charm. And Jim Burnstein was certainly one of those people.
Once Jim was in love with Nicole, Mary Ellen began to feed him wild stories about Bob.
He's been doing things to Nicole for years.
She even told Jim that Bob had been sexually assaulting Nicole.
There was never any evidence to support these allegations on the part of Mary Ellen. Nothing more than, I guess, his outrage so that he would be determined to kill her father. That was all part of the manipulation.
Listen, nobody's ever gonna find out about this, okay?
Jim agrees to kill Bob Samuels in a deal that would pay him some money and avenge the horrible things that Mary Ellen said Bob had done to Nicole. Whether Jim was the actual triggerman that day was never proven.
The circumstances under which Bob Samuels came to be dead on the floor are murky. We don't know if it was Jim acting alone, if it was Jim acting with another guy. But we do know that Bob Samuels ended up dead and Jim was behind it in some way.
To complete her plan, Mary Ellen leaves fake phone messages on Bob's answering machine.
Bob, it's Mary Ellen. Are you around? Been trying to reach you for a couple of days, so please call me when you get this, okay? Bye.
She stays away for 2 whole days, knowing he lay dead in a pool of his own blood. But all does not go as planned. In the months after the murder, Jim Burnstein begins to think he's been used after Nicole breaks off their engagement. And when the cops start to press him, he hints among his friends that he might reveal what really happened to Bob Samuels. But Mary Ellen wasn't about to let that happen, and she was clever enough to keep her hands clean.
Mary Ellen approaches Anne and suggests that she would forgive Anne of a $2,000 loan if Anne would facilitate helping her get rid of Jim Burnstein.
Anne quickly came up with a plan, convincing her boyfriend and another man to murder Jim and dump his body in the Ventura Hills.
Jim Burnstein winds up being pushed over the side of the canyon, and that's the last we hear of him until his body's found.
Anne's confession reveals Mary Ellen to be a woman who spun a web of lies in order to feed her love of money. Police finally have enough evidence to arrest Mary Ellen and put her on trial for the murders of her husband and her daughter's fiancé. Her daughter Nicole is never charged or named in the conspiracy. The prosecution decides to build their case on Mary Ellen's greed and her ferocious desire to live the good life.
I think money was the primary motive for Mary Ellen Samuels' actions, but I also think she liked being in the spotlight, liked being larger than life, liked being able to control other people.
The jury finds Mary Ellen guilty of first-degree murder, and their sentence leaves no room for leniency. Mary Ellen Samuels is sent to death row, where she remains to this day.
She had decided to play God with her husband's life, with the hitman, probably with Anne Hamley. And that's the law of the land. So I think that it was the right verdict.
Mary Ellen's charm almost let her get away with murder. But perhaps Mary Ellen's most disturbing, dirty little secret wasn't all the attention she could draw in a crowd, but instead, how easily she blended in.
As outgoing and flamboyant and maybe a little bit over the top as Mary Ellen Samuels was, she was still your next door neighbor. And I don't think that anybody could have imagined what she was capable of.